Okay, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the New Hampshire Tech Alliance's HR Exchange. My name is Jim Reedy, and I'm an attorney with Sheehan, Finney, Bass & Green. For those that are familiar with the Tech Alliance's HR Exchange, we meet monthly. And pre-COVID, they were breakfast meetings in our offices in Manchester. Now, during COVID era, we're going virtual, like a lot of HR associations are. So, and this will be the way we'll be for at least for the foreseeable future. But we're pleased with the number of people that have registered for today, and it's certainly a hot topic. Virtual screening, virtual recruitment, screening, hiring practices in this COVID era. You know, when you look back at this in March, when there were stay-at-home orders and emergency orders and the like, and then related furloughs and layoffs, and then work from home, meaning remote work, and the like that went on until probably May or June, and then the gradual return to work in some capacity, hybrid, or for those that decided, workplaces that decided to allow employees to work remotely entirely. Whether you're back in the office, back in your facility, full-time or part-time or fully remote, what has remained effectively fully remote is the practice of recruitment, screening, and onboarding. And so we're thrilled that we have three very experienced HR professionals here this morning. We've got Bree Elliott from the Ballantine Partners. We've got Carrie Grube from University of New Hampshire, and Hope Kelly from Granite State Manufacturing. Three very different workplaces, but very experienced HR professionals to share their experiences with this new normal, virtual hiring and so on. But as we get started, we've got a couple of things. Just going to go to the next slide. The HR Exchange, we've got a couple of events coming up. Again, we meet once a month. Wednesday, November 4th, we've got Liz Bailey talking about managing remote workers and avoiding FFCRA and related COVID-related retaliation claims. And we're seeing a lot more of that as employees take advantage of the benefits available to them under the FFCRA or under the ADA for purposes of looking for remote work as an accommodation, or because they need to be at home. School-age kids, daycare closed, and so on. In December, on December 9th, we've got Karen Whitley talking about navigating the four-way intersections of the FMLA, Workers' Comp, ADA, and the FFCRA, which is due to expire December 31st, but it may be extended. So certainly a hot topic as well, because it's an awkward intersection. It used to be a three-way intersection between the FMLA, Workers' Comp, and ADA. Now you added one more with the FFCRA. And that, again, is on the morning of December 9th. And then we've got events scheduled through June of next year, but we'll post those in the next weeks or so. So as we go to our panelists, just go to the next slide if you don't mind. Oh, before we do that, my apologies, we've got a poll. And the poll is related to the topic for today. First question is, and we've got three questions. What is your greatest challenge in hiring during this new normal? Checking one of those, which would be recruitment, interviewing, screening or background checks, onboarding, or retention during COVID. What is your greatest challenge during this new normal? The second question is, do you think that you will maintain some or all of these virtual hiring practices after the COVID crisis passes, which hopefully will be sooner than later? And then the last question, where have you seen the best results with your new recruitment and hiring procedures? First is finding more candidates. Next is improved interview sessions. Next is better chances of successful hire, or more efficient reference checks, greater streamlined process, or improved record keeping. So if you could just check one in each of the questions. and we'll have the results during our panel discussion. Just give you another minute or so to complete those. Of course, I wanted to add one more question to that, which was, if you had a crystal ball before all of this started, how many of you would have invested in Home Depot, Amazon, or Grubhub? So now that you've had a chance to just quickly complete that poll, let's go back to introducing our panelists. Wow, great results so far. I mean, as we can look at that, recruitment is the greatest challenge. These practices will likely be maintained afterwards, and a greater streamlined process. Very interesting. So one of the few positives that come out of the COVID process. So let's introduce our panelists for this morning. And again, we typically go from about 8:15 to about 9:15 with questions afterwards. Of course, the benefit of the Zoom meetings for all of you that are Zoom experts out there, we do have a chat function. So you can actually send in through chat or through the Q&A section at the bottom of the screen. So you can post your questions throughout. The panelists, Bree, Carrie, and Hope will respond to the questions. We conclude our this session at about 9:30 or so, but we're thrilled you could be with us today. So let's talk a little bit about the panelists. I think I've got their bios up there too. Well, we'll share the bios in a minute, but otherwise, you've got Carrie from the University of New Hampshire. As you can see, it's there, of course, in higher education. She'll talk a little bit about their workplace and the diversity of that workplace. The number of employees, 4,000. Talk about a challenging environment and employees onboarding since COVID started in, say, March, 300 plus employees. That's incredible. Granite State Manufacturing, high-tech manufacturing firm that does DoD work. Hope will talk about that. Number of employees, 134. Number of employees hired since COVID, 29. So a significant number given the size of their workplace. And Valentine Partners Wealth Management, Bree will talk about their workplace, 91 employees, and how many hired since COVID, 4. Also still significant. Really, the most significant would be any more than one hired and what that process was like. But as you can see, this panel has a significant experience in that regard. So I'm going to turn the comm over to Bree, and we can take the program from here.
Absolutely. So Carrie, I believe, is on the phone. Do you want to talk about UNH, Carrie?
Sure. Yes, thank you. Good morning, everyone. I am having some VPN issues this morning, so you can't really see me, but I am calling in on my phone. So thanks for having me today. I'm happy to be here. A little bit about UNH. So UNH is part of the University System of New Hampshire, and USNH is the largest provider of post-secondary education in the state. UNH is New Hampshire's flagship public research institution. We have 12 colleges and schools, and that includes Manchester and the Law School in Concord. We are an R1 institution. This means we have very high research activity. We have grants in the areas of land, sea, and space, which equal more than $150 million in funding. We're nationally ranked in the top 20% for research. And as Jim said, we have about 13,000 students and 4,000 staff and faculty. In mid-March, UNH went remote, and I'm using air quotes here. About 90% of us went home. As we continue to reduce density on campus, we are in what we call the yellow mode of operation. So green would be ideal and orange would be limited. Of course, red would be not ideal. Currently, roles that are student facing are on campus. So that's faculty, staff, and we are teaching using a hybrid model. And as Jim said, we've hired and onboarded more than 300 people during this time.
Thanks, Carrie. So at Granite State Manufacturing back in March, we went remote as best we could. We are an essential employer and we are a manufacturer. So many of our employees cannot work unless they are on site. So we deployed as many employees as we possibly could and went from there. So currently we are at about 50% still remote, and some of that is intermittent. So we do have folks that come in occasionally on site, but remain remote to the best of their capacity. We have 134 employees currently, and we are growing and hiring 2 locations, one in Manchester and one in Nashua, New Hampshire. And we have, as Jim said, onboarded 29 new employees since COVID started. We have been in business 80 plus years, and we developed a COVID task force right as soon as things started in March, which includes our ownership as well as our president and a couple of members of our senior team, as well as myself. So we talk every day and have navigated through the recruiting and onboarding as well as everything else in our operations.
Thanks, Hope. Valentine Partners is wealth management. So we are financial advisors and consultants to very wealthy families, and that's our focus. Most of it is multi-generational wealth, so it's many layers deep. We have about 91 employees, 3 locations, New Hampshire, Mass, and Florida. And we brought on 4 since March, and we went completely remote, and we remain completely remote as of today. Our offices are open for voluntary people that want to go in up to a 25% headcount. But to keep the numbers socially distanced and to keep them down, we have limited it. And I'll tell you, most people aren't taking advantage of it. They would prefer to be home right now. So we are in a similar vein to what Hope was talking about. We did put together a task force, although it's mostly our leadership team that meets regularly anyway, that has made decisions and used this time to really try to figure out and streamline what COVID and post-COVID will look like. Carrie, you want to talk about recruitment?
Yes, thank you. For UNH, COVID actually made some of our recruiting issues happen faster. For example, pre-COVID, our campuses relied on what I call the post and pray method, meaning we post a job and hope that someone really, really good applies. Our process previously was decentralized. What that means for us is that sometimes HR wasn't involved in the recruiting and hiring process. We would be looped in towards the tail end, and this would be more like processing a transaction than real recruiting. Now, we actively recruit candidates from networks, LinkedIn, finalists from prior searches, and we partner with other schools like community colleges, tech centers, and adult education centers. We're doing more outreach, and we're bringing candidates to UNH versus hoping they apply. Now we're also a little more centralized. Since most hiring managers aren't on campus, HR is being brought into the conversation earlier. So not only can we educate on best ways to hire and onboard, we're actually seeing better candidates and more engagement with our talent brand.
So at Granite State Manufacturing, we did standard postings pre-COVID through Indeed and other job boards, as well as college and other association job boards. We manufacture large machine parts and weldments primarily, and also primarily for the U.S. government, specifically the U.S. Navy, for U.S. naval ships and submarines. So we are, through that, we have lots of opportunities through social media, and networking is important for us to identify the candidates that can do this work. We also mine candidates through Indeed and LinkedIn on a regular basis, and we have an employee referral program. And we use recruiting agencies for those highly skilled positions or key positions. So when COVID came up, our college relationships diminished because they were distracted with other things and going remote. So that was a bit of a struggle at that time. And our networking also just diminished because we weren't out being visible as we had been in the past. Our employee referrals, we felt diminished early on because I think a lot of our employees were sort of wondering what was going to happen and wondering if they should be recommending GSM to their network. And then pleasantly, we found that they increased. So I think they gained confidence in us when we put safeguards in place and we showed our stability and that we were still bringing on new employees, we were still growing and so forth. So, so that was a nice surprise, I guess. Our need increased mostly due to increased business, but we also did have some turnover, and I'm sure a lot of you appreciate that there's been some volatility in the labor market with COVID. Our candidates started to inquire a lot about our COVID-19 practices. So, so they would ask questions about how we were doing things. So we came up with a lot of scripts of, so we could be consistent in that message, and our candidates could know what to expect from us during the recruiting process. And we found ourselves mining candidates a lot more so that we could let people know, again, that we were still here, we were stable, and we were growing and hiring.
So Ballantine Partners was very similar pre-COVID to UNH in that we blasted as many sites as possible, trying to bring in as many candidates. And that was everything from job boards like Indeed to colleges and universities around the country. We also were big on recruiters. We used a lot of them if we were seeing not the right type of candidate or the pipeline wasn't filling as quickly as we wanted it to. Fast forward to COVID and budgets get slashed. So focused online postings and referrals from outside sources like our centers of influence, which for us are accounting firms, law firms, etc., as well as our employees became our main focus in order to get in recruitment candidates. And then we chose to selectively freeze certain positions and really focus on the ones that were most important to the business to bring in. As a shop of 1.5, my focus needed to be split between our employees and our clients' needs during this time as we tried to deal with this ourselves and figure out Ballantine's process. So having me focused also on recruiting was not a choice we wanted to make. So we have a question in the chat. So James has asked if we're using applicant tracking systems. Ballantine Partners uses Kronos Workforce Ready, so we have the full suite, including applicant tracking. Hope, Carrie, do you want to talk about how you do your applicant tracking?
Sure. UNH uses something called People Admin. It is, I believe it's not an applicant tracking system I've used in my career, and I believe it's strictly tailored towards higher ed, but we do use an ATS.
Hope.
Thanks, Bree. And we also are using Workforce Ready through Kronos and are currently implementing our applicant tracking system. So previously we used a combination of sort of a homegrown system, and we also did tracking through Indeed.
Carrie, you want to talk about UNH's interviewing process?
Yes, thank you. So prior to COVID, we had a kind of things in two camps. We would do phone screens, sometimes campus interviews, always, but sometimes we would skip the phone interview and just bring people to campus. Our campus interviews could be several hours long, sometimes a day, spread over 2 days, and sometimes 2 to 3 rounds. Our culture is very collaborative, including the hiring process. So we would see interview teams of 12 to 15 people. And as you can imagine, this would make decisions very difficult. The searches were not timely, and it was usually difficult to get everyone on the same page. Currently, we are doing all our interviews via Zoom or Teams. We don't have anyone come to campus for an interview, but we have made some exceptions for finalists that are outside of New Hampshire that have never been to New Hampshire. We'll do a quick visit, a campus tour, and have them meet with some key stakeholders before they accept an offer. We also follow scripts on Zoom now. We were finding in March and April that people were talking over each other. They didn't know when they should ask their question. So now we have it scripted out so everyone knows what to expect. Everyone gets a chance to participate, and we always make time at the end of the call for the candidate to ask questions. We've narrowed down our interview teams to what we're calling decision makers. And these are folks that can help focus on specific skill sets to help assess candidates. And this has helped keep our teams, our interview teams, small. And lastly, our Zoom interviews are typically 60 minutes. We will go to 90 minutes if the interview team is large, but we try to keep it down to an hour.
At GSM, typically our recruiting process started with phone screens followed by in-person interviews. We had multiple stakeholders, so we, like Carrie, we were a very collaborative environment, and we invited teams or team members from other departments to participate in the recruiting process where candidates' job functions would overlap. And we did do some virtual interviews, so we were a little bit familiar with that, but that was typically based on scheduling issues or location constraints. And that was really the only time that we did that. Otherwise, we welcomed folks to our building. So upon COVID, we went to Zoom interviews, and it was a process to get folks on board with that and understanding, the value of that and why we had to do it. We also did some phone calls, and initially, especially if folks were more comfortable with phone calls before they could get familiar with Zoom or WebEx. And we just got better and better at it. So we just really kind of stayed on top of it and made sure that we were bringing everyone on board and that we could get to a place where folks were comfortable with all of those platforms. We vetted candidates, or we vet candidates more thoroughly before on-site interviews. So again, we're an essential employer, stayed open the whole time, but we did shut down with regard to visitors and other folks coming into the building. So we made sure that if we did have a candidate come into the building, we did have hiring managers that were just lean towards that and really felt comfortable having folks in and felt more comfortable with that that way of interviewing. So we had to deter them from that and really get them on board with vetting the candidates. So that was the person that they were going to sell to GSM when they did bring them on site. And that was a lot for our employees as well, because we have a lot of employees that have to be on site to do their job. They don't have a choice and they have to be here, and we wanted them to be comfortable that we were doing our due diligence. So all of our candidates follow our GSM guidelines that continue to be. We do temperature checks when everyone comes into the building every day. We wear masks, we sanitize, we keep our distance, and we disinfect common workplaces, work areas. We did a little bit of adjustment to candidates. So depending on the level of position, the comfort level of the interview team, and especially as time goes on, because I'm sure many of you have experienced that in some areas, folks are trying to relax things a little bit, but obviously COVID's still here. We still got to deal with it. We still got to function within that world. It has enabled us to get more insight we used to ask those probing questions to try to understand if a candidate, how they functioned under pressure and under unusual circumstances. So with these circumstances, we're able to see firsthand how they react to some of those things.
And at Ballantine Partners, similar process to what you've heard from UNH and GSM. So we have phone interviews with HR, those still happen. Then we would move to multiple in-person interviews on site, and it would be multiple interviews across multiple days. So it was multiple rounds. And similar to GSM and UNH, we would have an overkill on the number of employees involved. Our culture is built around collaboration and teamwork. So the thought was the more people involved, the more buy-in on the candidate everybody has. From anyone who has done large group interviews, that is not necessarily the case. So COVID gave us the opportunity to completely overhaul our process. And we looked at it not just from a streamlined side, but also from a DEI side, diversity, equity, and inclusion, to really dig into whether or not we had any pieces of our process that could do better at bringing in more diverse candidates. We moved everything to video interviews, including our phone interviews. So we give the candidate now in HR an opportunity to choose if they want a video interview or if they want a phone interview. And for comfort level, some people prefer the phone interview to start. We have managed to get managers to agree to a select group versus the overkill of everyone in the department. And what we've seen with the lack of travel, our staff obviously travels a lot when we're not in COVID state. With the lack of travel, we've actually been able to schedule and move candidates through the process at a much quicker level, which has been beneficial to the business as well as our candidates. Carrie, you want to talk about offers and contingencies?
Thank you. So prior to COVID, we would conduct traditional reference checks. I'm sure everyone on this call has felt the pain of playing phone tag with a reference before actually getting them over the phone. Currently, we are able to capture these within our applicant tracking system, and this saves us so much time. We can typically turn them around in 24 hours. Our background check process hasn't changed a whole lot, except we're finding that they are taking longer. Typically, they would be taking 7 to 10 days. Now, sometimes they take longer than 3 weeks. Our offer letters were done in paper and typically by the department. Now they're also electronic, and they are being managed by human resources. So there's a date and time stamp as to wherever the offer letter lands, from HR to hiring manager to candidate back to HR. There's a date and time stamp, so we can keep track of it at all times. I-9. So I-9s have always been an issue for us because of the volume of hires we do. Prior to COVID, we did all of our I-9s on paper, in person. We had piles of them waiting to be scanned into a secure folder at a later time. Now, we have within our applicant tracking system, we have an electronic way of doing these. The first page is done completely in the system. And then once it's complete, we're notified that it's complete. We reach out to them and we ask them to come to campus so we can verify their documentation. So much easier. Bree, over to you.
So for GSM, not much has changed with regard to offers and contingencies. We do have an additional electronic exchange, and our references have always typically been over the phone primarily. Our pre-employment exams are specific to physicians, so we don't do pre-employment or post-offer exams for all employees. And we typically schedule them for the start date, so with that contingency that they successfully complete that. So post-COVID, our references seem to be more responsive, so that was a really great surprise. Not sure if it's because people, are more available because they are remote, or if they are just really working to help their associates become gainfully employed and are more responsive for that reason. We have more remote workers, so during our offer process, we are inviting them in initially, and we'll talk a little bit more about that for the onboarding, but we have folks come in, just for a short period of time to sort of get situated, do the things on site that they need to do under the safeguards, and then we deploy them remotely.
So for Ballantine Partners, not much has changed. We still have our 2-week offers. We still do background checks. We are seeing a longer time depending on the state. So states that appear to be mostly computerized seem to come back in the same time frame. Those that are not, Maine comes to mind, tend to take a little longer. We've seen an uptick in people's responsiveness on reference checks, but we've also added video if they prefer that, which we didn't before. The biggest thing for us is that COVID has given us the ability to prove remote work. We had a lot of managers who said, we can't go fully remote, we'll lose our culture, we'll lose what Ballantine is. And we've been able to prove through COVID when we had to do it that that's not the case. We've actually been able to hire people out of state. Some are planning to move to one of our locations, some are not. We're planning work from home post-COVID with a 1-day in the office requirement a week in order to give people a chance to interact and really have kind of a Ballantine culture day. And then post-COVID, we're planning July and August to be a work from anywhere. So Thursday would be waived for those 2 months. You could work from anywhere you wanted. Obviously, there will be tax consequences to that depending on the state they're in and what we have to do from that aspect and how long they're there. But at the very least, we are giving people the flexibility that they have really seemed to want and have engaged and really embraced during COVID, with a sprinkle of the 3D people that we all miss so much. Carrie, you have a question in the chat about what is the applicant tracking system capturing in terms of a reference check? Is it a written statement or a video submission?
It actually can be, it can be both. We haven't turned on the video, so it's mostly written for now.
And is that built into your applicant tracking system, the one focused on higher ed, or is it a separate system that connects to it?
So the written is connected to the applicant tracking. The video is, I believe, a different vendor that's tied into the applicant tracking system. We're still researching that option.
Thanks, Carrie.
Sure.
Carrie, you want to talk about onboarding at UNH?
Yes, this is the area that UNH has seen the most change. Before COVID, we were like the Wild West. HR, because we're decentralized, HR would have to run around and find the offer letter. Because it would be on paper, we'd have to have someone scan it and email it to us. We would have to make sure an IT request had been requested by the department. We'd have to make sure that they had a parking permit for their first day. We'd have to make sure that their confidentiality forms were in place. And because of this, a lot of our new hires wouldn't get into orientation on their first day. So not a great first impression. Also, our orientation would be a full day long because of all the things we needed to cover, because we weren't sure what had been covered previously. Earlier this year, we created within our applicant tracking system an electronic workflow. So everyone knows where everyone and everything is at any stage. So we're also using technology to create offer letters, to create ID numbers, to create IT accounts, and then also get new hires the core information that they need prior to starting, like policies and procedures, benefits information. They can download a parking permit straight from this secure site. They can also get information on how to get their ID card. This has helped us reduce orientation down to about 2.5 hours because most of the new hire questions are answered before they come to campus. Orientation also was in person for a full day, and now it's virtual. And because we have such low numbers on campus, we would do orientation every single Monday. And now we're doing it every Monday at the beginning of a pay period. I think another thing that this has done is this has actually gotten us as a campus to be better prepared for new hires' arrival because everyone knows they're coming, which it's a big deal, I would say, for a new hire. Bree, over to you.
So
Thanks. So pre-COVID onboarding was very much hands-on. So my staff would bring in folks and guide them through the process on a personal level, very much so. And we had more paperwork. We did a lot of introductions during the onboarding and orientation process, in-person introductions, and really wanted to capitalize on that collaboration and our culture. And we also did a lot of follow-ups. So we would actually have, you know, ticklers or scheduled follow-ups with new hires to, you know, in person to be sure things were going well and things like that. So post-COVID or during COVID, the most people that we have had start on the same day since COVID started is 4. So we still do in-person orientations on some level, and we spread out if that's necessary. If we have multiple people, we follow all our safeguards, we wear masks, have the distance and so forth. And we still do introductions from a distance with those that are available. And then we ask, we sort of give the new employee a routine and key people to make sure that they connect with and meet. And then we still do that follow-up, although it's not in person. Orientation is more self-service. So although you may even be in the same room with somebody, you're handling things, you're going through things yourself, you've received more direction and instruction and guidance to work through things yourself. We have new hire packages that we actually deployed out to all of our employees, sent to their homes, bags that were branded with GSM that included notes from our COVID team and stylus pens so they didn't have to touch on anything, disposable masks, GSM branded masks, and things to equip them to be safe, not only if they were on site, but as well as if they were remote. So we purchase additional ones so that we give them to each new hire as well to start their employment safely and with the safeguards. We're using more technology, so we're putting out more technology to our new hires to utilize that rather than the in-person. And we're doing a lot of virtual training. So we do have a population that does not have computer access. And for those folks, you know, we use our largest conference room and maybe only have 6 people in that room. My assistant does the boots on the ground work with that. And I conduct those trainings virtually and have the rest of the staff that has that capability participate virtually.
So for Valentine, for those that know me, I am huge when it comes to using tech to try to streamline as much as possible. So we have had the full Kronos Workforce Ready, which includes onboarding for a while. And it includes, even before COVID, it included a piece of the I-9. Although back before COVID, it was verified and completed in person. So they would do the first part and then we'd do the second on site. Their onboarding schedule was very specific on the job training. Their topics were specific. They had scheduled time to watch recorded trainings that we had related to us. And then they spent a lot of time in what I called relationship building meetings. So that was company paid lunches or morning meetings just to get to know the people they would be working with, to really start building those relationships they would need to be successful at the firm. Fast forward to COVID, and of course, everything moved to video. So Teams or Zoom, I-9s, we're verifying through the system directly now. We've done some small local socially distanced meetups with local employees that have wanted to do those. So we had a foursome go get ice cream in Waltham, socially distanced with their masks on until they were eating their ice cream, of course. Things like that to kind of keep their connection to each other as things have slowly opened up. But for the most part, I think the biggest shift for us was getting everyone that started, those 4 new people, brand new IT setup. So that's laptop, 2 monitors, keyboard, docking station, the entire gambit they would normally walk into in the office in their cube, shipped to their home ahead of time with IT before they start to get things set up, so that on day 1 they're ready to go. That was probably our biggest uptick from a cost standpoint, as well as from a time drain on IT resources. Carrie, you want to talk about your conclusions?
Yes, thank you. A few things that we've seen at UNH. Our processes are more streamlined. So like I had mentioned earlier, we have insight into what's where and who's doing what, and we're using technology to do this. We're seeing better partnerships and increased engagement with our customer base. And I define a customer here as everyone that's involved in the hiring process. So the hiring manager, the department, admins, the deans in some cases, finance, and the new hires. We've been able to break down some of those silos to work better together, and we're seeing better collaboration. I think my favorite is we're seeing better time to fill metrics. So we are able to identify where there are snags in the process and help alleviate some of that. But we're also able to see new hires starting sooner, and they're actually coming to campus better acclimated so they can start more quickly. And Hope, I finally got it right. Over to you.
Thanks, Carrie. So we have definitely seen more streamlined processes, and that, that was as a result of the need, and it was in a lot of ways a little bit easier to really convey that to our staff, that this is something that we just have to do, and if we're going to sustain, and if we're going to serve the warfighter, we're going to have to do this. So we were able to cut out a lot of the fat, and we continue to ask ourselves, why are we doing this, and do we really need to do this? We've grown our second location, so the remote, getting used to the remote stuff has really served us in bringing that location up and running. We have better record keeping, so much more electronic, much more real time and visible to everyone. That has been a great help. We've increased engagement, so we've got a lot of people on board with a lot of the initiatives that we're trying to drive, and a lot of passion towards driving them, and passion towards driving them even in a remote environment. So it's been really great to see. And this whole thing has been such a team building effort, not only in recruitment and onboarding, but in other areas of our business. And we've really tried to capitalize on that in the collaboration, and using that rather than, hiring in or purchasing other team building activities. We really tried to build it into the business and allow for that business connection and customer connection.
So at Ballantyne, similar to what UNH and GSM has seen, it has been a real, and the poll, if I'm remembering from the beginning, streamlining processes has become one of the biggest benefits that we got from COVID, if we're looking for the silver linings, of course. It also confirmed the value of things that have been resisted. So the remote work has been a resistance from some of our management team, and having to go remote has really shown them that we can do it, and it's added more flexibility to our staff that they really seem to be engaging and enjoying. And we found that, and we were reinforced by, we're getting good decisions and we're having positive changes as long as we stay focused on what are our values. Why are we doing it? How does it fit with who we are? And what are we looking to drive with it? So as long as we're focused on those pieces, our decisions so far have yielded great results. So there's another question in the chat. Do you see a continued increase in using video in the business as a result of the pandemic? Carrie, how do you feel about that for UNH?
It's something that we've certainly talked about. I think as a campus, we don't always embrace the newest technology quickly. We like to see how others have worked with it and then decide whether or not we're going to use it. So it's not something that is on our horizon right now, but I think we'll get there, put it that way.
Hope, how about for GSM?
So definitely. So from not only a recruiting and onboarding perspective, but we during COVID we put in place a new vacation policy, and our president recorded a video explaining that change and why it brought value to the organization and brought advantages to our employees and so forth. And I see us doing that a lot more going forward, and we've talked about that. We do have a bit of a challenge from a recruiting perspective, especially with regard to videos, because we're super secret, because we are a DoD provider. So so we have a little bit of challenge that way. But as far as just kind of putting, you know, the name with the face and trying to make a connection through video, we definitely plan to do that going forward.
Same for Ballantine Partners. We are not a DoD contractor, so I don't have to worry about that. But we plan to continue to use more video whenever possible, and not just in recruiting, not just in HR, but across the organization. Being financial advisors to individual families, there's a lot of travel involved for our group. And once COVID hit, they were able to pull back on their travel, and we found some clients have really enjoyed the video option over the travel option. So I see it continuing to grow as well. Carrie, what is the name of the employee tracker UNH uses again?
It's called People Admin, and it was actually recently acquired by another company, I believe, Power School.
Good.
I'm not positive on that though.
And Jim, do you want to take over? Those were all the questions in the Q&A.
Yeah, I think that was a great presentation, guys. I think the insights from very different workplaces, you know, Ballantine Wealth Partners being a smaller operation, but with remote employees, the university system, of course, being a very large employer with multiple locations, but the same challenges with regard to remote employees, and of course, the unique challenges with a DoD employer and with employees that needed to be on premises, at least in the manufacturing element, but still the commonality, which was streamlining the process, different approaches to recruitment as opposed to post and pray, and more successes in that regard. So the positives we see out of COVID and the many challenges that we've seen, there were indeed some bright spots. And from what we can see from the poll is that employers look like they're going to continue those post-COVID, and hopefully post-COVID will happen sooner than later. So we do have time remaining. So other questions that come up, let's see what we have here. One from the city of Concord experienced much of the same results that you've mentioned. We do experience some resistance from some of these changes. Do you find the same, or how do you deal with it? And so specifically dealing with resistance to change. And as folks at Sheehan Finney can attest, I resist change all the time. It's stuck in my ways, but what I think what COVID has taught us is you got to roll with it, and you have to make adjustments and changes. So back to the panel, what has your experience been with regard to implementing these changes, whether it's in recruitment, background checks and screening, or onboarding? And have you experienced whether it's from the applicants and employees or from existing employees or from managers, any resistance?
So for Valentine Partners, yes. I mean, nobody likes change. Nobody liked COVID, you know, the work from home when it started. Now they don't want to stop it. Like, for us, I have found sometimes the only way to get them on is to push them through. So, working with them, showing them what the value is, what this new change brings, what it adds. And the same with candidates. Although I think at the beginning they were unsure of how all of this remote interviewing and starting was going to be. People seem to have embraced at least the remote recruiting piece of it. So for Valentine, it's really been about being patient and really working with the person. And given my size, it's easier for me to work one-on-one with someone to help them overcome their concerns or their fears around what that change is.
And at GSM, I say it over and over again how fortunate I was to have a team from the get-go. So our COVID task force is our owner, our president, and our VPs of sales and finance, and myself. And we were able to present a united front from the get-go. So we speak daily, and we are able to talk about you know, how we're going to approach recruiting and what we're going to stand by. And we had to put ourselves in check all the time because we were getting constant objections and and pushback from our employees and in some cases our candidates, customers, etc. And we really just stood by the safeguards that we put in place, and that we had made a collective decision. This is, we were going to guide. And we found in a lot of cases that our employees really did want to know, they wanted sort of to be told what to do. And they wanted, they ultimately needed the guidance. And we were able to really stand by that and stick to it. So we continue to navigate through it, and new things come up all the time, and new, new obstacles and things like that. But we've been really fortunate in that way.
UNH is very similar as well. I think for our employee base, I try very hard to understand what the pain points are. And then what I try and do is tailor a solution around those pain points. We've also worked really hard to identify our partners. We've got super users, we call them, on campus, who are folks that we've identified that would be quicker to adopt new ideas and new technology. So if we can convince them, it spiders out to the campus a little easier for us. But mostly, when we're talking new technology, when we decided to do electronic offer letters, nobody wanted to do them because they looked ugly. And again, I'm using air quotes. The campus hiring managers felt the letter looked ugly. We've never heard a complaint or a concern from a new hire, but what we did was walked them through every single step of the process. And because it's electronic, always said, if you run into trouble navigating the system, reach out. You can email me, you can text me, you can call me. We're here to help you through the process. And that seems to have worked.
I can say I have, in addition to my practice, I have a unique perspective in this regard because my youngest daughter is a recent college graduate and she is in the job hunt. And the realities of applying for jobs and going through the interview process in COVID is unique from the applicant's perspective, especially for someone who's never been through it before. And what's interesting is I think that she, while she's worked in other places before and had great internships, she doesn't have any great resistance to this new mode because she's comfortable with technology. But I guess a question from our audience is, any feedback from your applicants as to how they like this new applicant tracking technology?
So for Valentine, we've had applicant tracking for a long time. So it's not, the tracking system itself for us isn't new. on the video interview piece, which is, I think, new to candidates as well as Valentine's employees that are processing it, that has been a little more difficult, whether it's, candidates struggling to figure out how to use the tech or not having connectivity. And I've found that if we can be flexible with our applicants and work with them with what they have and their knowledge level, it has paid off in the end for us. So I guess it's one of those, patience is a virtue. If you can help them through their tech struggles, it seems to be fine once they're through it. But that's been where I have seen people struggling the most as candidates or having the worst feedback, is trying to work the technology.
Same here. We sort of have a process in place. So if we have a candidate that identifies a challenge, and we're just implementing our applicant tracking system, but as far as applying online or applying through the website, we actually during COVID for some reason decided to launch a new website. So I'm waiting. I was hoping it would actually be up for this presentation, but so we're modifying things. We're trying to create new streamlines and things like that. But as far as if a candidate does identify a challenge, we kind of have a step process on how to work through it with them and give them, a little bit of instruction to start, and then if we have to, make it more intense.
We're very similar at UNH. Going back to extending an offer letter, we will outline what the steps that they'll see next. So the offer letter will come to them electronically via a link, and then we explain the other things that they'll see. We also let them know that we're available if they get stuck. Another thing that's been really positive for us is we ask for their feedback after they go through the entire process. A year ago, we hired a chief information officer, and this process was at the very beginning stages, and we put him through it and asked him for his feedback, and we asked him to be very critical, which helped us streamline to where we are today. So it's been mostly positive on the new hire candidate employee side.
When all this started, if we look back to March or April, I think we can all basically think that, well, given the science of the time, given the projection of the time, and given our experiences, I think we all would have guessed that, or we would have hoped that this would have been over by summertime. And of course, that's not the reality. And so the question for the panelists is, we've been in this new normal now for 7 or 8 months. What's next in the area of recruitment, screening, hiring, and onboarding for the next 6 to 12 months, assuming it, to some degree or another, we're going to be in this COVID state or virtual hiring practices for the next half year to year?
So from my perspective, I think it is continuing what we're doing and making it more efficient, making it a better process, making it more engaging for candidates and our staff. Because I do think this is probably going to be a longer haul than we may all wish. I also think that it's going to become more and more vital in this virtual world that you be high touch with your candidates. So for example, Valentine's process has always been high touch, and we don't do automated emails. So if we get 100 candidates, they're all going to hear directly from myself or my assistant. They're not going to get an automated, aside from the, yes, we received your resume, but it's still a reply back to either myself or my assistant. So I think that's going to become more and more critical the more and more virtual we stay.
I think for us at GSM, one of the things that we have talked about is not to diminish the high touch, but in an effort for more flexibility, we will take advantage of the screening process in a way that offers flexibility to our candidates. So a lot of our challenges is that candidates don't want to take time off from their current job in order to go through the recruiting process. And we have a lot of positions that have some standard things that we really need to know about the candidates with regard to their skill set and their experience. So canning those questionnaires, so right now it's a screening template that we do either over the phone or in person. And we have very limited questionnaires as part of our recruiting process. So that candidates can just answer those standard questions at any time as they move through the recruiting process. So we're talking about doing a lot more of that, assessments and things like that. But again, while maintaining that connection to a person, that continues to be really important.
And for UNH, I would say, and I hope that we would continue to use technology to address some of our processes. I would love to continue to increase engagement with the campus as well as candidates and be more proactive. Prior to having a recruiting function on the UNH campus, everything was left up to the departments. So it's interesting to learn their processes and come up with something that works for the entire campus. I could see us creating trainings around best practices. That's something we don't have. We do those more one-on-one. We are creating user guides to help some folks through our systems. And I would hope that HR would be more involved in these processes as we move along.
Well, I want to thank our panelists this morning for taking the time out of their very busy schedules in, again, these challenging times to share their experiences. As you can imagine, a fair amount of work went into these discussions and the preparation of the materials, and of course the behind the scenes AV and related activities that go into putting on virtual conferences. Just as at home and in my workplace, and of course with our panelists, these programs, it is truly a team effort. So we truly appreciate, and a special thanks to Bree, Carrie, and Hope for taking their time to and sharing their experiences with our HR crowd. And we will post the results of the survey on LaborNet. And I believe that our presentation will also be shared on our website, Sheehan Finney's website. So I want to thank our panelists again for taking the time. Truly appreciate it. And the comments we've received so far have been terrific. As you'll see on your screen, their contact information is there, and each has generously agreed to respond to questions directly from you folks afterwards, or to share experiences afterwards. So thanks again to Bree, Carrie, and Hope for being a part of this. Thank you all for being a part of this presentation this morning. And we look forward to you joining us at future presentations. Thanks so much and have a great day. Bye-bye.